everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the Safe House Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the Safe House Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. We live in a time where there's an alphabet of soup of letters and acronyms that we all have to try to tease through. MDR, XDR, EDR, all kinds of other acronyms. And, today we're really fortunate to have Mark Sangster, who's the Chief of Strategy for Adlumin. And he's going to be our guest today to kind of help us tease through the alphabet soup and kind of get down to the ABCs of MDR in particular. Mark, welcome to the Safe House.
Jeff, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
I am too, because I think we need clarity, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there in small, mid-sized businesses that go, okay, it'd be nice to be able to, detect and to respond, or to just, what do I have to do to prepare? So first off, before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself and just kind of tell them, kind of your path or your journey to get to where you are today, so we all get acquainted.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in cybersecurity and IT technology for 25 plus years with some big names that the Cisco's, Intel's, BlackBerries of the world, if we all remember those mobile devices way back in the day, pre-iPhone. And, along that journey, I've worked with a lot of different industries, a lot of different levels of employee, managers, executives, boards, et cetera. And through that, you start to see some common themes. So it's been a real pleasure, working with these companies, protecting them, dealing with what we deal with, but there's also the excitement as well that I've picked up, at least in the last 10 years, is doing things like researching the industry, researching victims of cybercrime, talking to those that commit the crime, and law enforcement, and that kind of inside information really gives me sort of I think more motivation, right, to sort of figure out how we protect the small businesses, because they're the ones that are being targeted.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say that it sounds like you wrote the book on it, but I think you have written some books on this subject.
Yeah, exactly. So about 2 years ago, I wrote a book called No Safe Harbor, which really was a kind of a basic guide to understanding cybercrime and some of the sort of obligations that executives and companies would have. Because I found, time and time again, I was standing in boardrooms or meeting rooms and going through this sort of exercise with them and realizing, there's got to be a better way to do this than, sort of one at a time, right? I need to figure out how to do one-to-many or broadcast. And the second book that's just coming out now is called Cyber-Conscious Leadership. And it's sort of, instead of it's my research and my experience and the cases that I worked and so on, it was more about interviewing victims of cybercrime, the criminals that commit it, law enforcement people, government agents, CISOs, anyone I could talk to sort of around that circle of cybercrime, regardless of which side, to get a better feel for what was going on. And I'll tell you, I think, really talking to the execs and the leaders who had gone through it, there's a lot of insights, right? You want to hear from, I hate to say this, you want to hear from the veteran, you don't want to hear from the rookie. So, having been there's a lot of insight that you're never going to find in this framework, as an example.
What were some of the most surprising things that you learned? Just curious.
One of the execs said to me, you've got to treat cybercrime like a business, right? So, he said he really tried to take the emotion out of it. And I was somewhat surprised, right? Because this individual, I'm going to say, had a heavy dose of ego and arrogance. So, being that kind of self-reflective and humble, I was a little bit surprised there. The other thing too that popped out for me is working with, talking to some of the intelligence people was, the ideology is a real powerhouse. Criminals don't see themselves as criminals. They look at it as, look, I'm going to make more money doing this, and you guys deserve it anyway, because, effectively I've been, neurally shaped to believe, on one level or another, you're a dehumanized enemy, right? So, we can talk about the American dream and we all kind of know what it means. Maybe we would describe it a little differently. Our standards might be different. For them, that concept of the pride of, say, Mother Russia or their homeland is as strong. And while they don't like communism, they don't want to go back to the Soviet Union, they certainly sort of liked the power that the Soviet Union wielded on the geopolitical stage, right? So there's a bit of an angst, I think, to return to that, whatever, make Russia great again kind of thing.
So it's almost like a career path.
It absolutely is a career path. And I think that's what's important. We for years, we've been trying to say, look, it's not a kid in a hoodie sitting in mom's basement doing something bad. It's not a script kiddie. It's, organized crime. And, that's it, right? I call I call them the Misfortune 500, right? All those big ransomware and state-sponsored gangs that are out there, because they operate like a Fortune 500 company. And we saw that with the collapse of the Conti ransomware group at the beginning of the Ukraine war, right? And, they were kind of coming out on either side as Ukrainian or Russian. And that exposed a whole bunch of information, like, structured communication channels, executive hierarchy with, HR and operational people, and, reporting, measuring things like how much is it costing them in terms of, salary and operational costs and time to deliver, right? Or time to exploit, and then with reward models around that, right? So, good performers get bonuses, and the more they hack, the more they bring back, they're getting a cut, just like a sales rep would. So, that's when I got to the point of like, yeah, they're the Misfortune 500 because they operate the exact same way we do. Just, they're on the other side of the table.
Well, the 100% club in Barbados is good for everybody, I guess. But
absolutely.
I digress. All right, so you have some skilled adversaries on one end, and now you've tried to protect yourself a bit on the other end. Set up some defenses, but they're going to attempt to get in, and you need to know. And so I guess this is where you get the detection element. And so there's a lot of acronyms in here. You get the MDR, XDRs, and where does it start, where does it end, and what's in between, and who needs it, and how do we go about getting it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, everybody go get your coffee, because it's gonna be a few hours. There's a lot. There's so much to talk about here, and you're right. So MDR, what is it? Let's just baseline. It's managed detection and response, and you were kind of hitting on the D in that, right? The detection capability, and that's right. So you really do have to. This is what it's about in real time. 24/7. MDR services use a set of technology to monitor, a client environment, and they are looking for signs of suspicious activity. Now, that might be, basic alerts and detections that those monitored devices provide and push, or it may be their own mix of that plus, whatever AI models they're using or any other sort of clever technology they have employed. And then that's going to give them these sort of additional detections. From those detections, they have to investigate them. Are they real? Are they valid? How severe or how dangerous are they, I should say? And then, of course, then we move into the R, which is the respond. And the idea here theoretically, or the goal, I would say, is that they should be able to contain the threat on behalf of the client. And that's, that's the minimum of R. Does that always happen? Not always, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, we saw this device acting badly, or this thing, this account is being suspicious. You should, go check that out, and it's kind of like, there you go. There's your ticket with not a lot of information in it. And you're sort of back, that's a small company with a very limited IT, infrastructure is, trying to figure out how to go about doing that. And that can be challenging for a lot of companies.
So the R in this case is more of an immediate response that says, I'm going to shut this down. It's not I have somebody negotiating on the phone. There's a difference in the R. Is that correct?
Yeah. You know what? Actually, bringing in the negotiation piece, I think, Jeff's excellent, because if you think about a timeline, if your MDR company can't stop something, right, and it turns into something more significant, like a material event, data breach, or ransomware shutdown, then they're going to bring in, as you say, you're going to bring in an incident response firm. And one of the things that, that collection of vendors might do is negotiate or broker the ransom, extortion fees. So that's very true. So yeah, think of R traditionally as the beginning of that piece, right? So it is let's say I found an account acting suspiciously. So I disabled that user's account, or I forced a password reset, something along those lines. I see this endpoint, pinging a whole bunch of other devices in our network. That looks like a precursor to ransomware. So maybe I'm going to disable that device. Maybe I power it off, or I just knock it off the network, right? I disconnect it, and it can't do anything worse until I, can actually go and get hands on keyboard and figure out what's going on there to decide if it was malicious or not. Then you're right. Then you kind of continue into let's assume there is something serious. Now we're calling the ambulance. Now we're figuring out how, if it's a massive containment job, it's not a couple of devices or accounts,
right.
That may take more people. Rebuilding systems, right? So making sure the ransomware, the malware, whatever it is, whatever they did, whatever, vector they got in from, we've plugged that hole. They can't come back through there. We know the extent of the damage or what they've touched, what the implications are. And then, then you kind of go into that. Okay, so what do we do about that? We build a new network. Do we have to wipe everybody's hard drives? And, there's really that sort of spectrum of, we just hope it's gone and we're not going to get infected again, to, we don't trust anything. We're just going to go and buy everything new and literally stand up a whole new environment beside our old one, and then, migrate, and that's it. And they never have to worry about whether or not the bad guys can still get in through the basement window.
So do the bad guys know if there's a MDR company watching over things? Can they tell that there's somebody there and then act accordingly if they can tell who it is?
I think they can kind of deduce that there might be, right? Because by now, I think they probably have a good feel for how long, if something occurs, like let's say an alert gets kicked out by an endpoint device, how long it takes the average IT person to sort of log in, take a look at it, and figure it out, whether or not they suddenly see more traffic going to that device or something like that. So they might be able, like I say, to kind of deduce it, or sort of infer what's happening from different actions. But there's not necessarily anything overt that's there. You know what I mean? There's not like, they're going to see code, for example, in the registry. There'll be keys and things for whatever endpoint, CrowdStrike or antivirus or things like that, right? So they expect to come across that. MDR doesn't have that signature because all those tools are there. It's the SOC, the Overwatch, right? So it's a bit like they might find the troops on the ground, but they don't know about the aircraft that are flying at 40,000 feet well above their head, and they can't see them, right? So that's kind of what MDR is the think of it as the air cover over the IT environment.
Now, there's a lot of other acronyms. Can you kind of walk us through that, like an XDR, an EDR? Yeah, there's all kinds of things, and people go, I have no idea what that is, or maybe it's just my simple brain.
No, you're right. So, one of the challenges we've had with cybersecurity is, I think unlike old forms of technology, we don't necessarily turn them off. You know what I mean? So as we've evolved from things like antivirus into, anti-spam and email protection and having a logging system that pulled all that stuff together from firewalls, like a SIEM. So SIEM, right? Yeah. Security Information and Event Management. That's the kind of the way I can aggregate all that information. Okay. And so as these technologies evolved, the problem is you don't switch off an old one, right? You still need antivirus and you still need a firewall. And, so it just gets more complex for companies. And that's why we continue to see all these darn acronyms, right? So EDR is endpoint detection and response. Think of the DNR, just like I said about MDR, the difference is they're really kind of focused through the endpoint tool. So that endpoint detection response EDR tool that you go and you buy that deploys, puts code on your laptop as an example, it's going to generate all sorts of traffic and information and alerts that could go into that SIEM. The managed part of that just, says, okay, you don't have to do it. Someone at whatever, endpoint provider is going to do it for you. And then of course there's SOAR is another one. So SOAR is a security orchestration, automation, and response. Think of that as the control tools that the MDR people or analysts would use to take actions in your environment. So like when I said, disable a user's account or, disconnect a device, that's the tool set that's going to, streamline the way that they do it. And that's important, right? Because you want to think about it like on the D and the R, right? How much information you can bring in through your detection portal, right? How much can come in from where? So like how bright is the light, right? How much information am I getting? And, how broad is the spectrum is, how many devices or sources am I pulling from? So it's important to think of that because you want it to be at the account and group level and the device level and the network level and traffic level and endpoint, all that cloud, right? And then of course the R part is then the next bit is, well, then through SOAR, right? So SIEM brought all that in, think of that as the one side of the coin. And then SOAR is the opposite side that now says, okay, so now that I know this, I have this piece of information. Now, here's how I make it actionable, right? And I go and I stop the device. So we've seen a combo of these, and where there's a lot of confusion, I think, is between managed EDR and managed detection response. Managed detection response is more, I want to say, generic, right? It just means we're managing any threats we see in your environment, we're going to, if we detect them, well, then we'll investigate and we'll respond. Managed EDR is kind of like I said, a lot of EDR endpoint detection response tools are really popular. They're probably one of the strongest defenses we have. But again, they're complex and they generate a lot of noise and logs and you got to deal with it. So the managed side, they just take it. But the challenges is really understanding, as I said in the beginning of the D, it really is about how broad of a spectrum you can collect instead of just being tuned, like think of your radio, right? If you're only tuned into one radio station, okay, you're getting signals from, the country station, but you can't
Yeah.
hear anything on the rock station or the all day news station. And you
Uh-huh.
need all of that, right? So
Okay.
that's where they differ.
Wow. A lot of complexity, but if you really strip it away, it starts to all make sense. The SOAR being a toolkit for the MDR provider, right? Did I hear that correctly?
And that is absolutely right. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, good. And then so the SIM is more of it's the Overwatch, and it's kind of like the pane of glass, or it's like an X-ray of sorts. So if you are a human body, the X-ray is taken, then you have a surgeon looking at it and saying, okay, we got this going on. You have the vitals being checked on a regular basis. That's your MDR, and then you got the tool set that you go in and do the surgical removal. Is that sort of a flow of thought that makes any sense?
Yeah, that is right. Yeah, right. So, the SIM is the, being able to collect the X-rays and the MRIs and the CAT scans and all that kind of stuff, right? You're right. And then the SOAR part of it is the toolkit. So think of MDR, it's just the M, it's the managed part. What it means is it's the Overwatch. That was a great word that you used, sitting over all that stuff. And it says, okay, when my X-ray shows a broken leg, right? I move into SOAR, which is we're going to go put a cast on your leg. Kind of whatever they have surgery or whatever they have to do, right? So that really is it. So you actually you nailed it. I just wanted to, make sure that understand that it's important to see the more you can see, the better it is.
Yeah. Well, now you understand why they have me hosting this, because I have to break things down as simple as possible so we can communicate. So anyway, thank you very much. So who needs it? I would assume everybody needs it, but if I'm a small business and I have a really limited budget, how do I go about this? Do mostly small, mid-sized companies engage MDR services? Is that who does it, or is it the enterprise type organizations?
Yeah, so enterprise organizations typically will build their own. So they'll bring in, they can afford to bring in their own, team of experts who will be up and, up all night doing the 24/7 kind of monitoring, right? And then they go and they buy what they consider, I guess, to be the best of each class, and they go off and they build a very custom kind of program. Mid-sized enterprise, so small enterprise, let's say, down at the whatever, a couple thousand employees.
Yeah.
They're kind of on the cusp of that, but they start to struggle with complexity and operational issues and so on. So they are an MDR customer, but they're certainly, just as you'd expect, right? The larger they are, the longer any kind of test and trial type of cycle would be, until they put it live in your network. But, the ones that need it the most, honestly, are the small to medium sized businesses, right? Because the other guys, to some degree, can afford this, right? They can, like I said, they can build out their own SOC. And just to give you an idea, generally standing up a security operations center, so buying tools, technology, having the bandwidth, the room, the people, the headcount, it's about $3 million on average.
Wow.
And then you've got, another whatever, couple of million every year to operate it, right? In license renewal, staff, headcount, et cetera. So, and you're usually hiring about 12 to 15 people to do that. And so most small companies, they're not doing that. That's their entire IT budget, if they even have that in their IT budget. Yeah. So, they can't do it. So they don't have that access to, sort of, let's say, government level or big business level security. And that's where I think MDR is extremely suitable, right? Because the price is sort of palatable. Yes, it's more money on top of whatever licensing they're paying for other security technologies. But in terms of headcount, they're probably paying less a year in a headcount than they would be for the MDR service. So it's really advantageous for them. And frankly, a lot of at the smaller end too, they're just struggling to adopt what you and I would probably consider to be table stakes type of technology, right? So they have a firewall and antivirus, but they're like, yeah, we keep hearing about this endpoint thing and we think we need to get it. It's like, okay, endpoint's been around about 10 years now, right? It is mature technology, and you should have that's a lock on your house door, right? Yes, it's a bare minimum. So they're struggling that way. And I think the other thing that I like about MDR is if it's done right and you are actually managing the threats, you're investigating them, and you're containing, whatever threat or, risk was hanging over the company. It has the advantage of, kind of making security go away. So you've sort of said this several times now, Jeff, right? Is that idea of your job is to kind of take this complex info and just break it down into very manageable pieces so that you don't have to be an expert and you can understand it. That's what MDR should be doing for those small clients, right? Is going, look, we're doing the heavy lifting. You go back to doing your business, right? Whatever your business, whatever that is, a law firm, a healthcare facility, a small manufacturer, a K to 12 school district, go back and do that. And because we've got your back, right? And that's for them, I think, why it is probably one of the best solutions that they can invest in, because as I said, it's cost effective. And it's going to sort of up their security game and bring them up into the, mid-market sort of capabilities. And here's the other piece where I think it's most important is if you look at all of the statistics out there, not just like the big reports, the Verizon data breach report, but look at, the insurance claim information around cyber. You'll see that the majority, right, like 3/4 of the victims are little companies. They're SMBs with a couple hundred employees. They are not, most of those claims are not being made by big banks, big manufacturers, DoD vendors, those kind of guys that you would expect, assuming that they're very publicly, they're publicly exposed. They would be assumed to have a lot of money or data that would be interesting, whatever, something that makes it palatable for a criminal to attack them. But it's really the small, it's the soft underbelly. It's a death of 1,000 cuts, economically speaking, is what they're doing.
Well, and does it help with a third-party risk management response? I mean, in terms of being accepted and doing business in a food chain of sorts, does it help answer a lot of those questions or tick the boxes?
It absolutely does, because if you look at, any kind of framework that they might want to use, NIST or, CMMC, right? The cybersecurity maturity model that's been, incubating now for a decade, better part of a decade, is finally coming to fruition. So, they're looking at these as, okay, these are the, the standards of security. Most of the small companies just can't, they're not going to be able to do a lot of this stuff, right? So for them, it's probably, they use some algorithm to prioritize, and then from that, they deploy, tech. And that's probably actually coming through partners. Like they're using a managed service provider, or a reseller, somebody like that is where they're buying it. So for them, it ticks a significant number of the boxes because, if they've got the basics in place, MDR can then deal with, all the other elements that those, the ability to collect information, to know if it's been tampered with, to, take action on it, all that kind of stuff that is, like you said, is table stakes or minimum requirements for a security framework, they're going to do on their behalf. And that's, it significantly lightens their load.
This subject, like you said, we could talk for hours on this one, but for this first niblet, if you will, our first conversation, I guess I envision maybe having further conversations about this in future podcasts. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing, Mark?
Yeah, Jeff, I'd love to, because, I think the best way I've gotten through, been able to communicate to, various levels of employees and companies is by telling some of the stories, right? Not the headline stuff, not rehashing, the big major breaches we've all heard of, but talking about what it's like when one of their peer businesses, gets hit, right? And so I'd love to be back on and share some of those sort of cases and what actually went on, how we discovered it, what we did about it, what the impact was to the customer, and and then kind of dive a little deeper, because it's the only way to share, right? And that's what we need to do, is make sure that across the industry, we share these stories to help each other learn. Otherwise, we're all just sort of victims, in the dark by ourselves.
Well, let's put a pin in that, because I'd love to take you up on that and get you on for those stories, because I think that would be fantastic. I think our audience would love it.
I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Any further thoughts for today's final thoughts before I'm going to ask you the big final question.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, look, not all MDR is the same, right? It's broad definitions. There could be a lot of confusion. So do your homework, understand what you need, right? Like where are your shortcomings or gaps, and that's okay to have them. But, once you identify that, you want to find, the key that complements those, the provider that can actually do this. And honestly, go for more than a demo. You got to see it in your environment. Kick the tires in your own sandbox. It's the only way if you're going to know when, the proverbial stuff hits the fan and you need somebody, to stop this from disrupting your business. It's the only way you're going to know if they can do it.
So if my audience has, or our audience has, one thing they could do today, and of all the things you're suggesting, what's the one thing they could do that's actionable and helps them be more secure and more operationally resilient?
I would say get someone to provide some sort of executive level threat, sort of industry briefing, right? So talk them through what's going on in the environment, what are their obligations as it relates to the business, and then what should they be doing about it, right? So, if they're a bank, they have a certain standard, or healthcare, you have to deal with HIPAA, something along those lines. So that what they understand is the risk. And to understand the risk, they now know what the threats look like, what they'll look like when they show up in their inbox or at their front door, and they know what their obligations are. And they understand it in a fiduciary sense. Because now, until you do that, it's hard to create a culture of security. The culture of security is going to, that's going to flow through everything. That's what's going to, help you clear budget, make sure people are properly trained, all that kind of stuff. So, until you really understand the problem you're trying to solve, it's hard to go and buy an effective solution.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to have you on the Safe House today. And you've been a wonderful guest, and I really appreciate everything we all do. And you're going to help a lot of people with your insights and your recommendations.
Well, thanks, Jeff. My pleasure. It's been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to future ones.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the Safe House Initiative. Thanks for joining us. And remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information about the Safe House Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen, or send us an email at info@safehouseinitiative.org, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.